Hello and welcome back to Mind Flux's YouTube channel. My name is Michael L. Penman, and today what we're going to be diving into is a bit of mixing. When I'm speaking to my students, I often find that a lot of their problems when it comes to mixing is the kick and bass. And this is a pretty common problem across most music, mainly because the bass carries a lot of energy and it also sits very closely in the same octave ranges, so normally within the 0 octave or the 1st octave. So that kind of leads us off to a good point. So first thing you want to do is make sure your kick drum and your bass are in tune. So for example, I like to place my kicks on the root note or the 5th note. And if you're not too sure what that is, say for example, you're in the A minor key, which is all the white notes, that means you would place the kick drum either on the A or the E. My kick drum in this instance, I do believe, is in G. And we're just playing a standard 4/4 techno kick. And then another thing to think about is where you physically place your notes. This isn't always possible, but try if you can not to have any notes where your kick drum would be playing. This gives each other a little bit more room. But as you probably know from listening to a lot of techno tracks, kick drums can actually last the whole quarter note. So that can also be a problem. And this is where certain mixing techniques will come into play. So let's get started. So I'm just going to neutralize everything I've done prior. So I'm just going to press number 2 and that'll take everything off. And we're going to start again. So I'm going to zero out these. I'm going to disable the sends and we'll have a look at those later. So with our kick drum in tune with the bass line and they're not really playing the same places, we're going to start by loading in an EQ. So let's close that. So we'll go into our browser and our audio effects, and I'm just going to bring in the EQ8. First thing, I always like to put a cut, and when I'm working at techno, I tend to put the cut around about 20 hertz. So that is here, and you can see I've already got it defaulted as that. It's a bit high actually. And remember, if you want to save the defaults, you just right click on the name and you go to save as default. Bear in mind you can only have one, so don't do too much. So with the kick drum playing, what I'm going to do is isolate the root note, so that's the note it's physically playing. And to do this, you're going to boost and narrow the Q. So all I'm doing is dragging the number, and to narrow it, you're holding Alt. Well, narrow and widen it. Okay, so let's just have a listen. So there we go. Obviously that is crazy loud. So now what I'm going to do is just drop the gain right back down and work from there. And you'll notice when I'm doing this, I'm not going into the red, mainly being because of my gain staging. And if you are going into the red, I would go back to the source. In this case, it's Simpler, which is Ableton's simple sampler. And I've took the gain down of the physical sample. You can also lower the gain of the actual instrument. So now let's go back to number 5 and bring up the gain a little bit. I normally like to push it a little bit hard and then bring it back, but I really try not go over 8 dB. That's not a rule, that's just kind of a rule I have for myself, because I feel if I go over 8 dB, that means I should really start looking at my sound design. And in this case, it would be adding in a layer to this kick drum. That's good. And when you're boosting, feel free to have a relatively wide band. So that's your Q. And when you're cutting, you're going to want to have narrower Qs. So I can hear there's a bit of like boxiness, or sometimes known as woolliness, or I'm not sure if there's any other terms, but that's normally in around the 100 to potentially 400 hertz range. So we're going to do the same again. We're going to cut this one. Okay, so it's just on the 100 mark, and that's actually the octave above it. So I'm just going to cut that ever so slightly. And again, narrowing the Q. Let's just see. Just cleaning it up a little bit. I could hear something else when I was scooping through. It's not very nice. So again, dropping it back, and then just cutting ever so slightly and tightening the Q. See if there's anything in the high end. And this is really what you're wanting to do with a lot of your sounds, is just boost the nice frequencies and cut the bad frequencies. And then obviously you have to also think about the relationship between the instruments in the same frequency range, but that's something you can do once you've got the sound how you like it. I'm actually going to have a wider band here. I could even use a shelf. So I felt like the top kind of transient of the kick wasn't what I was wanting. So now we're on to a bit of compression, and I'm going to use the standard compressor. First thing you're going to want to do is let through the sub, and you're going to do that by opening up the sidechain section, and from there hitting EQ, high pass, and I normally set mine between 100 and 200, so we'll just set it in the middle there. And what I'm going to want to do is get maybe about 4 dB gain reduction, and I'm going to cut off the makeup, and let's just get started. Let's start with 4. I think, and for me, most drum sounds, I like to have between 5 milliseconds and potentially 50 milliseconds for the attack. That's going to let through the transient, because what we're trying to do here is bring a bit more punch and beef into the sound, and we don't want the transient, which is this first point, to come in. So I'm going to set it at 20, and we can adjust that if it sounds bad. And for releases, for this tempo, anywhere between 100 and 250 is going to be good. So I'll just leave it there. And now we'll start adjusting the threshold. Again, I'm going to push it till it's too much. So that'll be like the gain reduction down to here. And then I'm going to level out, because I'm really looking for it to be about here. So you can hear that's too much. Still just trying to get it just right. Yep, and then I'm going to increase it by, I think it's about 3 or 4. Let's double check. Yep, sounding better. And I'd always do that. I'd always A/B things just to double check, because you might spend a lot of time on something and it sounds great to your ears at that point, but when you take it out, it actually sounds better. And I wouldn't worry about it. It just happens from time to time. So now I'm going to bring in the saturator, and I'm just going to drive the signal a little bit. And because we're doing techno, I can really push this sound. And what I've found recently, which I think is quite new to Ableton, is the color limiter, which is really cool. So this is emulating like old school limiters, like hardware stuff. And I mean, you can push it very, very hard because you've got a ceiling here. I would just be kind of careful because you can destroy the sound. So I'm going to take the ceiling down to 3 just to stop it from going too close to 0. And I'm going to have a little bit of saturation, and I'm probably going to tighten up the release. So as you can see, I can go pretty hard. That's crazy. But I'll go to about 8. And let's see what the saturation can do to it. And I'll turn it up and then we'll look what the color does to it. It can brighten it up or dull it. So I think there's quite nice. It kind of dulls the top end a bit. Okay, so that is good for our kick drum. Let's now move on to the bass sound. So again, we're going to clean it up a bit, but we also need to think about what's going on with the kick drum. So one of the easiest ways to do this is just to actually copy your kick's EQ and bring it over. And rather than boosting in these areas, what I tend to do now is actually cut this. So that is the frequency of the kick drum. So I'm going to take that and I'm just going to cut it down. And that should help our bass not conflict too much with the kick. And now we can move on to a bit of compression. So I'm just going to use the standard compressor again. So let's drop that on. Now I'm looking to add a bit more bite into the sound. So like with the kick, I'm going to let through the sub part. So if you're not quite sure what this sidechain EQ does, what it's saying is I'm only going to let a specific set of frequencies actually get compressed, and the other ones will just hear normal. So it's almost like a bypass for the frequencies. So in high pass mode, that means the frequencies below 138, that's what I've got set as, are going to be bypassed. We're going to still hear them, but they're not going to be compressed. And that's great because you want your sub parts to be really nice and clean. So when they're played on a bigger system, they're not getting colored too much. So let's just push it to 30 again, kind of similar to the kick. So we'll go between 30 and 10. Let's just have 4:1 to start. I always just kind of, for drums and bass stuff, just leave it at 4:1. And I feel like if I want more compression, I'll put it up. If I want less compression, I'll take it down. Makeup off as usual. And because of our tempo, I'm going to go roughly between 60 and 200. So let's get a similar gain reduction. So maybe like 3 dB. Let's do the makeup gain or the output gain. Yeah, it's got a bit more bite in it. Again, I'm going to use the saturator, but I'm just going to use it ever so slightly. That's my default, it's always quite loud. Okay, that's good. So now we need to start thinking really about the relationship between the two elements. So we've got them in tune, and we've got them not playing at the same time, but there'll still be some conflict. And let's just bring those levels down, because obviously with the two parts in, you can see the master is already red. It's not too bad, because they have got a little bit of room, but what I would like to do is apply some sidechaining. And we're going to be utilizing both sidechains in here. And what I mean by that is we're going to be utilizing the external sidechain as well as the EQ sidechain. I'm going to set it up as normal, like most people would do. Just having the kick drum come through. And whenever the kick plays, the compressor clamps down and stops the bass from playing. As you can hear, and as most techno people probably know, our kick drums, and like I've already talked about, are quite long. This one, I think, is about a dotted eighth, so that's very long. And what you're going to want to do is just have a shorter kick. So you can either do that with a ghost kick, which is a kick just playing, which is muted, or you can use the EQ and only have it on a specific set of frequencies. And if you want to hear what it's actually playing, you hit the little headphones button. Obviously, solo it. You can see how that's a lot shorter now compared to... Okay. So now that means our that means our bass isn't going to be cutting out so much. Okay, that's sounding good. One other thing you can do is add an EQ in, and I'm just using the channel EQ because all I need to do is lower the low end. But as you can kind of hear, we're losing a bit of that nice bass frequencies, which when the kick isn't playing is great, but when it isn't so great. So what you need to use for this is a Max Live device called Envelope Follower. And you're going to drop this onto your kick channel. And you're going to map that to the channel EQ on the bass channel. And what this is known as is dynamic EQ. It's completely set up wrong at the moment. So let's go into here. I want it to start at 50, which is 0 dB. And I want that to go to maybe, let's start 20. Maybe a bit too much, so what I can do is just pull the gain down a little bit. It's almost like the amount. I can make it really heavy or just ever so slightly. So that's sounding good to my ears. Another good thing to help gel these two parts together is utilizing auxiliary effects. So first thing I've got on aux B or return is our New York Compression. So first of all, let's send both of these there. So I'm going to bring all these back online. And what New York Compression is sending all your rhythmic parts there, which includes your top loops, so like your hi-hats and stuff, as well as your bass parts. You're going to have relatively fast attacks, you're going to have relatively fast releases, and high ratio and high threshold. I've also applied the EQ sidechain, which isn't normally part of this, and then you have a little boost here, but I've done mine tilted just to cut out the low end. Normally you wouldn't do this, you would actually have this positive. And it's just a really over compressed tight signal. But as you can hear, it brings the parts very nicely together. So sometimes what happens when you're working with bass is you're losing some of the mid-range. So for this, I've used the pedal tool. And I've used it on an aux, and I'm just really overdriven the signal. So I'm going to switch off the EQ. Let's just have a listen to it. But what I wanted is for it to only be in the low mid-range. So you can see I've used a high pass and a low pass. And I've just put a drum bus on to tighten the transient. So I've used the transient designer to tighten up because I felt it was a bit loose. So I'm really liking this, but as you can see, we're pretty close to the red, which means we've literally got no headroom for anything else. Let's take the faders down to minus infinity. And also bring the hats back in. And what I'm going to do is mix the signals in. But what I do for this to ensure that the signals are loud enough, and this is from analyzing a lot of other records, is I use a spectrum analyzer. And with the kick drum, I look for the root frequency, and I try and get the level of the kick's root frequency to roughly minus 14 to minus 20. Then I set the bass 3 dB to 6 dB below that frequency. So now let me show you this. So I'm just going to be using my complete control. There's a little mixer in here, so that means it allows me to see the spectrum while I'm turning the level up. So let's play it. Slowly bring it up. Let's see what level that is. I'm hovering the mouse over, and you can see in the bottom left, it's telling me, so that's a little too loud. So minus 14 there. That's where we want it. Now I'm going to solo the bass part. I'm going to put the mouse down 3 dB. So it's minus 17-ish. That'll be close enough. And that clicking you're hearing is the kick drum coming through the sidechain. If you want to get rid of that, increase the attack of the compressor or use the look ahead as well. So let me just unsolo that. And now you're going to use your ears. So that's a good bass level in terms of a good starting level. So now you can just adjust, because I feel the bass is maybe a bit too loud for my liking. And then you just use your ears to bring all the other elements in. There you have it. We've managed to successfully mix a techno kick and a techno bass line together, maintaining space, but as well as gelling them nicely together. And this is a great starting point for anyone wanting to learn mixing. And if you wanted to take this even further, we do offer tuition in our London studios. So just head over to www.mind-flux.com. And there's more information there, as well as if you enjoyed the kick drum sound, you can download that in our Dark Warehouse Techno Sample Pack, and that's Techno Sample Pack 2. And the bass sound is actually from the Roland. It's been multi-sampled, and it's going to be in a new pack called Zone, which should be out at the end of September. If you've enjoyed this, remember to subscribe to our channels and set the alerts so you get updated straight away.